You have twice welcomed me by standing up, and I'm deeply appreciative. I will caution you all to remind you that Winston Churchill once said that the only reason people give a standing ovation is they desperately need an excuse to shift their underwear. I know you had a much more noble concept in mind. President McRobbie, distinguished members of the Board of Trustees and distinguished senior faculty, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mr. President, for your very kind words, and thank you for hosting us today. Thank you all for coming, and I am particularly appreciative of President McRobbie's outstanding leadership of this great institution. Hello to all of you. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, those of you up in the nosebleed section, for sitting up there. I feel the size of this group, I sort of brought my guitar, and I'm doing the wrong thing here. But I appreciate everybody taking time on a very, very busy Thursday. And life today is always busy. So I'm always appreciative when people take a moment to think about our country, think about the world and the direction we're going. For me, it is very, very special to get out of Washington and to come here to IU and visit truly one of the finest public universities in America. Your campus is beautiful. I landed amidst all the corn at Monroe County Airport, and there was a period in my life where I was measuring my life by the height of the corn. I learned that art. Your faculty here is absolutely first rate. Your students, brilliant, or so they tell me. And you are, above all, a global university with academic partnerships on every continent. And you live in what may well be the #1 sports state in our country, with the notable exception of Massachusetts. See, I am a risk taker. I love the history of your school, I really do. And IU is tops at one activity that I have followed and participated in all of my life, and that is cycling, which I love and do pretty well at, except when I fall and break my leg, which I don't recommend. I understand that the Little 500 is the marquee event of what you call the world's greatest college weekend. And if I remember correctly, which is very doubtful, I think I enjoyed my share of those kinds of weekends a long time ago. But as you know, when you need it, your memory can play tricks on you. For example, I have managed to completely forget that when running for president in 2004, I was crushed in Indiana. I don't even think Larry Bird voted for me. But it's a good thing that I am resilient, and if I hadn't lost, by the way, did you notice the segue in the president's introduction? He said, and he was the nominee president in 2004, and then he didn't say lost, he just said, then he was still. It's very, very gentle, very gentle. I appreciate it. You know, I won't go into it. But if I hadn't lost, folks, I wouldn't be Secretary of State, and I wouldn't be taking on what I believe is one of the greatest jobs in the world. Speaking of good things, I want to congratulate everybody here who played a part in conceiving of and developing your new School of Global and International Studies. It's phenomenal. I just learned there are 70 different languages being taught, 70 different languages being taught, and you have, extraordinary number of Chinese and other students here on the campus, truly international. It underscores why this conversation today is so important, because you can't function in today's world without understanding the connection. I said many times from the day I was nominated that foreign policy is economic policy, and economic policy is foreign policy. and today that's more integrated, and the world is more integrated than ever before, to some people's chagrin, as we will discuss a little bit today. But the opening of this school is really in keeping with this university's very proud tradition, which Dr. McRobbie noted, of helping to explain the world to America and America to the world. And yes, as he said, we do have to understand each other, and to do that, you have to listen, not just talk, and particularly not shout. You are very, very lucky also. Two people who've been already introduced twice, but I want to say a word or two about two foreign policy pathfinders who are involved in this endeavor. Senator Richard Lugar and I served on the Foreign Relations Committee together. He was my chairman, and I had the pleasure of working with him. And Representative Lee Hamilton, who I also worked with. Together, they were among the two most trusted figures in Washington, D.C., which I know today may sound to some like faint praise, but it is not. They were also, and they remain, deeply respected throughout and beyond our country for their wisdom, their patriotism, and their many legislative accomplishments. And their careers are exactly what true public service is all about, and I thank them, and I know you join me in thanking them for their extraordinary example of a lifetime. Thank you. And as for Lee Feinstein, I will only say that you're all going to find out what those of us who know your new dean learned a long time ago. He is a very smart guy, he is a very good guy, and he is exactly the right person to blaze a path for an institution such as your new School for Global and International Studies. I congratulate him, and I commend all those students who are here for discovering what I hope your professors will agree is a legitimate excuse to skip a class. The truth is, I really couldn't personally think of a more appropriate place to visit than here. After all, it is the heart of America. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care about international affairs. And I expect many of you are already thinking about what your own future roles might be in shaping a better world. We are living in extraordinarily complicated times. I am, as many of us on the podium here, I suspect, are children of the Cold War, but also children of the victory in that Cold War and of an enormous transition. And we are witnessing forces that for years were tamped down by dictators and by the Cold War itself. And all of those forces have now been released into a clash with modernity. Also, tinges of failed governance and radical religious extremism mixed in just to stir the pot even more. And we all know now that there are bad non-state actors. Almost all the violence as we look back of the 20th century, not all, but almost all, was state on state. When I might comment, and it's not meant to suggest that any loss of life is acceptable, but far more lives were lost, and lost on a regular basis in the course of the 20th century than we are witnessing in terms of trends, even with the violence we see in the 21st century. In recent days, we have, however, seen an eruption of tragic, outrageous, and unjustified attacks on innocent civilians who were simply trying to go about their daily business in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. And it is important that we all remain deeply concerned about this recent violence. We strongly condemn the terrorist attacks against innocent civilians, and there is absolutely no justification for these reprehensible attacks, and we will continue to support Israel's right to defend its existence. It is critically important, though, that calm be restored as soon as possible, and we, the administration, will continue to stress the importance politically and privately of preventing inflammatory rhetoric, accusations, or actions that could lead to violence. I expect to be traveling to the region in the coming days, and we will remain very closely engaged in order to support efforts to stabilize the situation. We are also committed to the people of Afghanistan as they strive to build a more stable, secure, and prosperous country. And just a few minutes ago, while you were sitting here waiting for me to come out, President Obama went out publicly to announce that the United States will retain 5,500 troops in Afghanistan beyond the end of 2016. This decision is the result of an extended process of review designed to ensure that our fundamental interests in that country and in the region are protected. Our continued military presence there is essential to give the new government of national unity the support that it needs to implement reforms and defend its population against violent extremists who seek to impose their will. And it is important to us as Americans who understand what happens when you don't have governed spaces anywhere and the vacuum is filled by extremists. Now, I've spent many hours with President Ghani and Chief Executive Officer Abdullah, and I know that they are both patriots determined to hold their country together and to consolidate the gains that have been made in such areas as education for girls. When we went in 2001, there were about 1 million kids in school, none of them girls. Today, there are about 8 million, and almost half of them are young women, girls, going to school. There's been an extraordinary growth in the delivery of health care and representative governance. And President Obama's announcement today will help to protect our country as well as to help Afghanistan on this road to recovery. But the challenges posed by the attacks in Israel and the West Bank, and by the situation in Afghanistan, of course, are not the only signs of turbulence on the global scene. Because of new technologies, we may find partners and competitors, allies and adversaries, literally anywhere on Earth. Each day, there are more people in the world putting additional pressure on limited natural resources, on the challenges of governance itself. Big chunks of the Middle East and Africa are torn by violence, creating a record flow of refugees. The age-old problems of nationalist ambitions and religious extremism are testing the resilience of the rule of law. And the devil's marriage of technology and terror prompts us to fear that the 13th century battles will soon be fought with 21st century weapons. Now, to some, all of this may lead to the temptation that in my younger days we called tuning out. After all, why worry about what seems beyond your control? So let me be blunt. The complications of this era are neither reason nor excuse to duck our common responsibilities. On the contrary, it is precisely because of the complexity of this world that we are required to tackle the hardest challenges and live up to the magnificent legacy that we inherited. If that doesn't sound easy, my friends, it's because it isn't. In fact, it will require from us the same qualities of optimism and ambition that transformed the United States from a wilderness into the most remarkable democratic society on the face of the planet. Because in the midst of uncertainty, I have come to know one constant. We are a nation of doers, conceived in a revolution against the world's then leading empire. We have survived the burning of our capital, the disgrace of slavery, a devastating civil war, a Great Depression, 2 global conflicts, prolonged military confrontations in Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf, a superpower rivalry, 4 presidential assassinations, and terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, Boston, and a lot more. And yes, We are not perfect. No one is. But we are resilient. And we are as strong, I think, as we have ever been. And as we look ahead, we seek not simply to address the immediate crisis of the day. Our strategy is to lay the groundwork for solutions that will strengthen the community of nations for decades to come. To succeed in that, we must mobilize the help and the support of allies and friends across the globe because we can't do it alone. No nation can. We have to make the best use of every single foreign policy tool, from multilateral institutions to the selective and sometimes necessary use of force. We have to take into account the transformative impact of new technology, a world in which people are connected 24/7 every day. More people in poor countries still have smartphones than they do have access to running water or electricity. We need to uphold democratic principles and strengthen the rule of law. And we have to always be willing to invest in American leadership, not because it feels good, but because it makes a difference, sometimes all the difference. And I believe that we can do all of this, and so does President Obama, with many reasons for great confidence in our capacity and in the road ahead. Now, there is a perception among some, and some argue it, even some running for president, that we should pull back, turn inwards, don't have to worry about the rest of this. Some suggest that the world is increasingly chaotic and even falling into disorder. Well, I disagree. Despite the many challenges that we face, as I travel the world, and as I talk to foreign ministers, prime ministers, presidents, people all across this planet, I don't sense an unraveling of the global fabric. I see a world that in critical areas is actually increasingly coming together. And let me give you 4 quick examples that underscore this. A trade agreement that represents 40% of the global economy. A potential climate accord that will require contributions from every nation. A nuclear agreement involving Iran, which the President mentioned. And 6 very different global powers that came together to help achieve it. And a counterterrorism coalition of more than 65 members, nations all, that carries with it the hopes of good and decent people everywhere. Each of these initiatives is distinct in purpose, but each requires both American leadership and the strong support of partners and friends. Each is a product of principle and pragmatism, embodying both what we should do and what we can do. And each will have an impact that extends beyond the headlines of the day. First, the arena of international economics and trade. Earlier this month, our negotiators finished work on one of the most significant trade agreements in history, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP as it's referred to. This is a big deal, literally, encompassing countries all around the Pacific Rim. And why should you care? Why does it matter to Indiana and every other state in the country? Well, Indiana is not exactly a Pacific state, but focus on the fact that Indiana's 3 leading trade partners are Canada, Mexico, and Japan, and all of them are part of TPP. So Indiana's exports, which are already at $35 billion, will likely increase under this agreement. And it isn't just big corporations that are going to benefit. More than 4,600 Indiana companies export to TPP countries. And some 80% of those firms are small or medium-sized firms. In fact, Indiana exports support more than 187,000 jobs across our country. Now, we should remember that 19 out of 20 of the world's consumers live beyond the borders of the United States of America. You're not going to grow if you just sell to yourself. You can't just sell to yourself. And in a marketplace, a free market, which we believe in, that's obviously antithetical to everything we believe in. If we are going to keep building our prosperity, and we must, We have to keep opening and expanding overseas markets. That's pretty simple math. So the TPP is definitively a plus economically. But it's more than just another trade agreement. It is a genuine breakthrough in bringing disparate nations together to raise the international standards of labor and environmental norms. It is a struggle. This is a struggle really that goes back to the dawn of the industrial age, when union organizers and muckrakers argued that profits not be wrung from the sweat of exploited and underage workers. And the reformers said that the global trade ought to be something more than a competition to see which country could pay its workers the least and trash the environment the most. And they said we ought to aim higher than that. Well, guess what? It's exactly what we did. Let me be clear. The TPP is not your parents' or your grandparents' trade agreement. This is something new. Consider that every participant in the TPP has to comply with core environmental and labor standards. Every member has to refrain from using underage workers and unsafe workplaces. Everyone has to ensure that state-owned companies compete fairly with those that are privately owned. Everyone has to fight trade-related bribery and corruption. Everyone has to respect intellectual property. And everyone has to keep the promises that they make, because those promises are clearly enforceable within this agreement. Now, I know there are some who hear all of this and say they still don't want any part of it. They may still yearn for the good old days when many, if not most people, worked in one job in one town for their entire careers. I sympathize. I too have affection for the past because that's where I grew up. But it's not where I live now, and it's not where any of us are headed. Last week, I saw a letter in the New York Times written by a gentleman from right here, Bloomington. And he wrote that Congress should both reject the TPP and, I quote, rethink globalization. Rethink globalization? Now just how are you going to do that? The most powerful country or person on the planet can't stop globalization. Globalization is driven not only by technology, but it is driven also by the aspirations of people around the world for an opportunity, for a better life. The truth is that globalization doesn't come with a reverse gear or an emergency brake. 1,000 different factors drive the jobs market, and the process of adapting to it can be very painful. But it just doesn't do any good to deny reality. Now, what does make sense, my friends, and it does, is to mitigate globalization's downside. It is to tame the worst instincts of unbridled capitalism and to have the kind of standards and regulations mutually arrived at that protect people against abuse and exploitation. It is also to make sure that we give every young person the chance to go to college by making an all-out commitment to lifelong learning, by providing support for entrepreneurs, by investing in infrastructure, and by backing institutions like the Exim Bank that help American firms to compete more effectively all around the globe. That is why the Obama administration is leading in each and every one of those areas I just listed. And despite concerns about globalization, polls show that most Americans view foreign trade as an opportunity, not a threat. And here's the reason. You know, you've all seen those duty-free stores at the airports, right? Well, America is pretty much one big duty-free shop. 70% of U.S. imports cross our borders tariff-free. But that's not the case with all of our trading partners. In fact, America's exporters face a wide range of high tariffs in many TPP countries. And that's why we have so much to gain from a deal that will eliminate over 18,000 foreign taxes on made-in-America products. a deal that will help our manufacturers, our farmers, and small business people to compete and win in fast-growing markets all around the globe. And what is more, the TPP matters for reasons far beyond trade. The Asia-Pacific includes 3 of the globe's 4 most populous countries and its 3 largest economies. Going forward, that region is going to have a huge say in shaping international rules of the road, on the internet, financial regulation, maritime security, the environment, many other areas of direct concern to the United States of America, to each and every one of you. And remember that in our era, economic and security issues overlap, as I mentioned. You can't lead one and lag on the other. By voting for this trade agreement, Congress can reinforce the message that the United States is and will remain a leading force for prosperity and security throughout the Asia-Pacific. And that will be welcome news for our allies and friends, a huge boost for stability in the region, an important step vital to our own well-being, and really good news for companies and workers here in America's Midwest. Now, a second critical area where the world is coming together is actually closely related to the first, and that is the challenge of the global environment, specifically climate change. And here, believe me, I have heard the deniers and the naysayers for years. We all have. For a long time, we've been listening to their wild theories and their lame excuses. Well, we're not scientists, so how can we have an opinion about climate change? I've heard that from United States senators. Well, here you are learning and practicing critical thinking in a university. Are you telling me that the fact that you're not a scientist means you can't say that the earth spins and that clean air is better than dirty air? You don't have to be